Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shlakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Oh, sorry. Jai Mishnapad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Shatarashata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhai Charnaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Mishnapad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Shatarashata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai, Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Samavita Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 8, text number 7. Proktam kilaitad bhagavattamena. Proktam kilaitad bhagavattamena. Nivritti dharma viratayatena. Nivritti dharma bhiratayatena. Sanat Kumaraya sachaha prishtaha. Sanat Kumaraya sachaha prishtaha. Sankhyayanayang gadhrita vritaya. Sankhyayanayang gadhrita vritaya. Proktam kilaitad bhagavattamena. Nivritti dharma viratayatena. Sanat Kumaraya sachaha prishtaha. Sankhyayanayang gadhrita vritaya. Proktam kilaitad bhagavattamena. Nivritti dharma viratayatena. Sanat Kumaraya sachaha prishtaha. Sankhyayanayang gadhrita vritaya. Proktam kilaitad bhagavattamena. Vritti dharma bhiratayatena. Sanat Kumara Prishtaha. Sankhyayanayang gadhrita vritaya. Kilaitad bhagavattamena. Nivritti dharma viratayatena. Sanat Kumaraya sachaha prishtaha. Sankhyayanayang gadhrita vritaya. Proktam was said, Kila, certainly, Etat, this, Bhagavatamena, by Lord Sankarshan, Nivritti, renunciation, Dharma Abhirataya, unto one who has taken this religious vow. Tena, by him, Sanat Kumaraya, unto Sanat Kumar, Saha, he, Cha, also, Aha, said, Prishtaha, when inquired of, Sankhyayanaya, unto the great sage Sankhyayana. Anga, my dear Vidura, Nritavrataya, unto one who has taken such a vow. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Lord Sankarshan thus spoke the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam to the great sage Sanat Kumar, who had already taken the vow of renunciation. Sanat Kumar also, in his turn, when inquired of by Sankhyayana Muni, explained Srimad Bhagavatam as he had heard it from Sankarshan. Purport. This is the way of the Parampara system. Although Sanat Kumar, the well-known great saintly Kumara, was in the perfect stage of life, still he heard the message of Srimad Bhagavatam from Lord Sankarshan. Similarly, when he was questioned by Sankhyayana Rishi, he spoke to him the same message he had heard from Lord Sankarshan. In other words, unless one hears from the proper authority, one cannot become a preacher. In devotional service, therefore, 2 items out of the 9, namely hearing and chanting, are most important. Without hearing nicely, one cannot preach the message of Vedic knowledge. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapatakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriya Vansha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so today's verse is focusing on Maitreya Muni's lineage in terms of the Parampara system. So indirectly, Maitreya Muni heard Bhagavad Katha from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we can say that indirectly he was a disciple of Krishna. But directly speaking, Maitreya Muni also has his lineage. So in this verse it's explained that Lord Sankarshan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, initially spoke this knowledge to the sage Sanat Kumar, who in turn instructed Sankhya Muni. And then if you see tomorrow's verse, it explains that Sankhya Muni had many prominent disciples like Brihaspati and Parashara Muni. And Parashara Muni, as we know, he's the father of Vedavyasa as well. So Maitreya Muni was a disciple of these great personalities coming down from Sankhya Muni. So he heard it from them. And now Maitreya Muni is telling or imparting this knowledge to his disciple Vidura. Whenever I hear the word parampara, it reminds me of how my Guru Maharaj oftentimes defines the term. He defines it as being spiritual technology. The parampara system is spiritual technology. Because if you think of technology, like if you think of, like audio recorders, like that. So audio recorders, they record sound vibrations, and then we can hear the sound vibration at a later point in time and in another place as well. So the two variables are that we can hear a historically recorded sound vibration at a later point in time. That's the first variable, time. And the second variable is that place. And there's also another third variable as well, if you think about it. Person. Anyone can hear it. Right? Transcendental knowledge is actually available to everyone to take advantage of. So these are three variables. So similarly, I remember, I think it was Bhakti Rasayana Sagar Maharaj, then Uttama Shloka Prabhu, when he was giving Bhagavatam class once, he was speaking about how Srimad Bhagavatam gives us an in-depth perspective of what's actually going on in the minds of Bhagavatam characters. Generally, we can't penetrate into someone's mind very easily. It's not very easy to understand what someone is thinking, how someone is feeling. But Srimad Bhagavatam, being compiled by such great sages like Vedavyas, spoken by personalities like Jiva Goswami, who can understand what's actually happening in people's minds. Just like we see Bhagavad Gita was spoken by, to Dhritarashtra, it was spoken by Sanjaya. And Sanjaya was a disciple of Vedavyas. So he had that mystic potency to be able to understand what was going on in the battlefield, and to some degree to understand what Arjuna was thinking, what Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was thinking. Tamuvacha Hrishikesha prasanna iva bharata sena yoro bhuyor madhye vishidantam idam vachaha. So you could see that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was standing there in the midst of the battle, and he had a slight smile on his face, and he was feeling very compassionate for his soft-hearted devotee Arjuna. And then on top of Sanjaya, then the most recent Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, he also gives us insight as well into what Krishna was thinking when he was smiling like that to Arjuna. So if we receive knowledge through purified devotees of Krishna, then we can take advantage of the parampara system, spiritual knowledge descending through generations and generations of these self-realized souls. So why is it spiritual technology? Because if you think of going back to the audio recorders, this sort of technology was probably developed, in the last century sometime. We can't hear sound vibrations which was spoken, 300, 400, 500 years ago by great persons. But through the parampara system, we have access to hearing the sound vibrations which was spoken thousands of years ago, 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, by these great personalities. And the test of that is how much it can change your consciousness or your heart. If we apply Krishna's instructions in the Bhagavad Gita, if we read the purports of Srila Prabhupada, we can see that they have a very purifying effect on us, a very soothing effect. Just like if you're disturbed or if you're too much materially entangled, even as a devotee, and then if you just take some time out just to hear Srila Prabhupada giving lectures or just read Srila Prabhupada's purports, Srila Prabhupada's books, then automatically you feel very calm, very peaceful, very happy and very joyful. So the proof is in the pudding. So just by hearing this message, which is coming through parampara, we can see the potency of it and the purity of it and the fact that it hasn't changed because it has an effect on us to this day, like that. So when we say that the spiritual master implants within us the bija, right? Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasade Paya Bhakti Lata Bija. So the fortunate soul who is traveling within various different species of life all throughout the universe, from the higher planetary systems right down to the lower planetary systems, sometimes, or very fortunately, he or she may come in contact with a devotee of Krishna, a guru, who may implant within the disciple the bija. So what is that bija? Is it actually a seed which is implanted within our heart? No. Srila Prabhupada explains in his purports to the Chaitanya Charitamrita, bija actually refers to sound vibration. So when the guru actually imparts transcendental knowledge, and that transcendental knowledge enters into the ears of the disciple, that is the bija. That sound vibration entering into the ears of the disciple, or anyone. It can be some innocent person who is curious about understanding Krishna consciousness, or even great devotees can even purify and convert to bhakti, even envious people, as we see in the case of Jagai Madai and so many other cases like Prakashananda Saraswati, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was a Vedantist and impersonalist. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his pure devotees can even change them. That's the purity of the sound vibration, which is coming directly from Krishna, from the parampara system, and entering directly into the ears and then into the heart. Rupa Goswami says, when he's hearing the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, the transcendental sound vibration enters his ears and settles on the courtyard of his heart and transforms his heart. So that process of the sound vibration entering into the ears and coming to the heart and transforming the heart, that is the implantation of the bija. That is what Srila Prabhupada defines in Chaitanya Charitamrita as the disciple receiving, or the fortunate soul receiving the bija, the bhakti lata bija. Now when you hear something, then naturally if you're inspired by it, what do you do next? You act on that knowledge. Right? You act on the knowledge. So that acting on the knowledge, that refers to the sprouting of the bhakti lata. That refers to the sprouting of the creeper of bhakti. So there's two things. You hear attentively, that's the implantation of the bija, the seed, in anything. Now, we're talking from the context of bhakti, but that can be like even karmi knowledge. Just like if you have some teacher who is teaching just material topics, and you're just a normal material student attending school or university, and you're hearing about business, you're hearing about accounting, about science, about engineering, this bija of materialistic knowledge is entering your ear. And when it fructifies, when it grows into a karma lata, the creeper of karmic knowledge, then you're going to act on that knowledge that you receive. You're going to be very enthusiastic about applying the scientific knowledge. You're going to be very enthusiastic about engaging in accounting and finance and all these sort of things. So the principle is that you hear, and when that hearing goes deep, then you apply that knowledge. And that application of the knowledge is the growing of the creeper of that particular knowledge. Just like we see Dhritarashtra. We were just talking about Dhritarashtra, hearing from Sanjaya. Dhritarashtra, Srila Prabhupada explains in his purports at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada explains that he was blind not only materially, but he was also spiritually blind, Prabhupada explains. Why? Although he was hearing from Sanjaya, he was also hearing from his evil advisor, Shakuni. Right? We know Shakuni, he was ill-advising Dhritarashtra. And as a result of that, he was not able to make the right choices. So it's very important to understand who we are hearing from. When we come to Krishna consciousness, therefore, sangatyagat satorvite. Right? We give up the association, the materialistic. Association means sound vibration. right? You can associate with someone. The main way we associate with others is by hearing from them, by hearing their sound vibrations. Just like it's also mentioned that one of the best ways that you can render service to a devotee, especially a pure devotee, a senior devotee, or your spiritual master, is by hearing from them. Just by giving audible, oral reception to another Vaishnava, that's automatically serving the Vaishnava. So hearing is stress. Like Prabhupada here at the end of his purport, he's saying, specifically for preacher, he's saying, in devotional service, therefore, 2 items out of the 9, namely hearing and chanting, are most important. Without hearing nicely, one cannot preach the message of Vedic knowledge. So before Kirtanam comes Shravanam. And Shravanam means attentively hearing. That's why we have to attentively hear the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, attentively hear what's being spoken in Bhagavatam classes, attentively hear Srila Prabhupada's purports. It's actually hearing. Even though we're reading the purports, whatever has been written in Srila Prabhupada's books has actually not been written, but has been spoken by Srila Prabhupada. So initially it was spoken by Srila Prabhupada. Generally when you take any novel or any materialistic book, the author usually doesn't dictate whatever's in that book, whether it's a textbook at school or whether it's some fiction novel or something like that. The author doesn't dictate the whole book. He just sits in front of his computer and just types the novel. Right? But in the case of Srila Prabhupada's books, Srila Prabhupada has spoken these books. So when we read Srila Prabhupada's purports, we're not just reading, but we're listening. That's the important thing. There's a nice story that comes to mind about hearing from the right sources or following a proper spiritual authority. This is a story that, I'm not sure if Srila Prabhupada said, but some of the acharyas have explained the story. It's a very simple story. It's a story of a blind man. Now, Prahlad Maharaj talks about andayatander upagiyamanas. He talks about the blind leading the blind. So this was a blind man, and he was trying to reach the house of his father-in-law. So he's trying to find the way, but he can't find the way. So in the distance, he hears some cows, they're mooing, and he hears the whistling and the singing of a little cowherd boy, a little farmer there. And he's tending the cows, he's herding the cows. So he yells out to this little boy, and he says, I'm trying to find the way to my father-in-law's house, but because I'm blind, I can't find my way. Can you please help me to get there? And the cowherd boy says, yeah, sure. Just hold on to the tail of this calf, because the calf's, just hold on to the tail of this cow, because this cow's calf is actually in the house of your father-in-law. So if you just hold on to the tail of this cow, because the cow is attracted naturally through affectionate bonds to its calf, this cow will naturally take you to the house of your father-in-law. So this blind man, he listens to this little cowherd boy, and seems like cowherd boys are always mischievous. So he holds on to the tail of the cow, and the cow becomes agitated. Naturally, if you hold on to the tail of a cow or any animal, the animal gets agitated, and the cow starts jumping around here and there, running through the fields, through all the muddy fields, running through the thorny bushes, and then dragging this blind man, unfortunate blind man, through the streets. And finally, he does make it to his father-in-law's house after much difficulty. But his appearance has changed so much. He's now, his clothing is soiled. His face is like just shriveled up because of being dragged on the cement road. His appearance has changed so much. He's been battered so much that finally, when the father-in-law opens the door, he doesn't recognize this blind man who's his son-in-law, and then he beats this person thinking that he's a cow thief. He's come to steal the cows and the calf which is in his house, and then he gets sent away. So this is a story which is given to demonstrate that we should not put our faith and our trust in hearing from just anyone. Kiba Vipra Kiba Nasi Shudra Kenanoy Krishna Krishna Tattaveta Sai Guru Hoy. So one who knows the science of Krishna, unto such person we should hear from them. And you can just go to the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So this is the 2nd verse. Does anyone know what the 2nd verse of the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is? Yeah. So this word, parampara, it comes there. Prabhupada opens this purport by saying, this is the way of the parampara system. So, evam parampara praptam imam rajar shriyo vidu sakala neha mahata yoga nashta parantapa. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. So 2 things mainly we can learn from this verse is that not only should the knowledge come from a bona fide source, but it should be imparted, transcendental knowledge should be imparted onto qualified people, which in this case is Raja Rishaya. It should be imparted onto the saintly kings, the Raja Rishis, and also to people favorable in society, like rishis, brahmanas, because it's their duty. The brahmana's duty is to advise the kings in transcendental knowledge, and it is the duty of the kings to enforce the knowledge which is being given by the brahmanas to them. Similarly, when we're preaching as well, we shouldn't give the knowledge, transcendental knowledge, to anyone and everyone. We can give them Krishna consciousness in different ways. If a person is completely envious, even Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that this knowledge should not be given to people who are not austere, who are not favorable to hearing this knowledge. But still, then it is said that Krishna also says to Arjuna that the one who reveals this knowledge to the devotees and discusses about this knowledge to the devotees, such a person is most dear to me, Krishna says. So then the typical question that people ask is, so then, most people in this world are not devotees of Krishna. So that means we shouldn't preach at all. But the answer which is given is that the mercy of the devotee is so much that the devotee makes the non-devotees into devotees. That may not necessarily be by giving them transcendental knowledge. If a person is heavily materialistic, if a person is completely envious, you can still make them favorable to Krishna consciousness without giving them transcendental knowledge. You can still impart faith in them of the science of devotional service and of the devotees themselves. How? For example, giving them prasad, by bringing them to the temple, showing them the deities, by making friends with them. By doing these preliminary activities in Krishna consciousness, one can make an envious and unfaithful person gain a little bit of Shraddha. Once the Shraddha is there, then one is eligible to hear this transcendental knowledge. So in that way, the devotee is an expert doctor, an expert physician. He can ascertain how much knowledge to give and to which person it should be given. So transcendental knowledge should come from a bona fide source. So we've established that. But it should also be given to the faithful and innocent people as well. This is one of the prime features of a Madhyama Adhikari. He doesn't give transcendental knowledge to anyone and everyone. He gives it only to those who are curious, inquisitive. We learned from the Bhagavad Gita, the Chaturvida Bhajante Mam, Jana Sukriti Arjuna, Artha Arti, Jigyasur. What is it? Artha Jigyasur, Artha Arti, Jnanicha, Bharata Rishabha. So these 4 types of people, one should unhesitatingly give transcendental knowledge to. The second thing is that Srila Prabhupada explains in 4.2, he explains that the atheistic class of men, if it is given, if transcendental knowledge is given to the atheistic class of men, then they downplay this knowledge and they mess with this knowledge. And Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the Bhagavad Gita itself. Srila Prabhupada explains that this book has been translated so many times. Sometimes it's translated by devotees, sometimes it's translated by non-devotees. And because they've gotten access to this transcendental knowledge, but not from a bona fide source. And because their tendency is that they're unfaithful as well, they twist this transcendental knowledge, and therefore it misleads others as well. We were quoting the verse from Ishopanishad, Ye ke chatma hano jana. So they are the killers of the soul. And there's another verse in Ishopanishad which says that, yes, those who are posing as... do we have Ishopanishad? Is it possible? Because it's a really nice verse. It relates to this. Andam tama pravishyanti ye avidyayam upasate. Then it says... No, it's okay. That's fine. That's fine. I'll paraphrase it. But it goes, Andam tama pravishyanti ye avidyayam upasate. What that means is that those who are without knowledge, ye avidyayam upasate, those who are without knowledge, transcendental knowledge, they're paving their way towards andam, towards the mode of ignorance. Then Ishopanishad explains, Ya'u vidyayam rataha. In the fourth line of that particular verse in Ishopanishad, it says, Ya'u vidyayam upasate rata, which means that worse than such people who have no transcendental knowledge are those people who pose as if they have vidya, who pose as if they have knowledge. Ya'u vidyayam. So the first one is avidya, the people who have avidya. Then it's talking about people who actually have vidya and are attached to this knowledge, so-called knowledge, but they're worse because they're actually misleading people who are without knowledge. When such people who are without knowledge, if they're given the proper knowledge, if they're given the proper seed of devotional service, then they can sprout to transcendental knowledge. But people who pose as if they have knowledge, materialistic knowledge, transcendental knowledge, and they mislead people who are innocent, who have no knowledge, that is a greater disservice than just having no knowledge. Because if you have no knowledge, at least there's a chance that you can be given the right knowledge to advance in devotional service. Or in anything, even the material sphere. Then, in text 3, it says, Sa evayam mayate dhya yoga prokta puratana bhakto sime sakacheti rahasyam hieta uttamam. Again, the qualification is given that one has to be Krishna's Bhakta, Krishna's devotee, and Krishna's Sakha. One has to be friendly in disposition towards Krishna. One has to be faithful, not unfaithful. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's that famous verse, Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kaya Shrudra Nishchaya Krishna Bhakti Kaile Sarva Karma Krita Hoya. That is the definition of faith. Faith means to realize that simply by performing Krishna Bhakti, activities in Krishna consciousness, there is no other thing that I need to perform to make my life successful. And Arjuna had that faith. And therefore this was his qualification to receive Gita Gyan from Krishna. Now, this faith can be divided into two different things. In previous classes, we've talked about how everyone has faith. It's not just that religious people have faith. Even materialistic people, even atheistic people, they have faith as well. But it's just that their faith is misplaced into something else. If one is a materialistic scientist, for example, he or she may put his faith into, the monthly science journal and whatever scientific experiments or results are being published in the scientific journal. If one is an atheist, one places one's faith in other atheists, other acharyas of atheism. Or one may place his faith in himself or herself, in oneself. So we're always having faith, but instead of placing it in Krishna and Krishna's devotees, we're misplacing it. So, because everyone has faith, this faith can be classified into two divisions. One is reflective faith, and one is called shadowy faith. So this is something which Srila Prabhupada talks about very briefly in Nectar Devotion. Reflective and shadowy. If you want the technical terminology, the Sanskrit terminology for this is reflective means pratibimba. You might have heard of this word, pratibimba. Pratibimba shraddha, pratibimba faith. And then shadowy faith refers to chaya. Chaya means shadow. So we can explain what these two different types of faith are. If you take a reflection and if you take a shadow, both the reflection in a mirror as well as a shadow which is cast on the ground, they're giving you some indication of the original thing. If I look at myself in the mirror, my reflection shows the original form of my body. If I look at a shadow on the ground, the shadow gives some indication of the original form, again, of my body. Now, here's the thing. If I look at a reflection of myself in a mirror, the reflection looks exactly like the original thing. It's completely detailed. You can see the color of my skin. You can see the color of my eyes. You can see the color of the clothes I'm wearing. You can see my hairstyle. Everything you can see perfectly. However, the reflection in the mirror is not connected physically to my original form. Does that make sense? The reflection which I'm seeing in the mirror is not physically connected to my original form, which is being reflected. Whereas if you take a shadow may not show the exact details. It may be a bit fuzzy. But it is physically connected to my body. So the shadow is connected, the shadow which is cast on the ground is connected to the original thing, whereas a reflection, even though it shows exact, precise details, is not physically connected. So in the same way, if you take the faith which is demonstrated by materialistic people, right? Like you can give an example of Mayavadis or impersonalists. They have faith, but they have faith again in the wrong thing, in the oneness, the impersonal oneness, and they don't have faith in Krishna. But if you look at their behavior, like if you look at their lata again means the actions that they're performing based on their bija, based on the hearing. If you look at their actions, they're very austere. They're celibate. They're very much advanced in Vedantic knowledge. Again, it's twisted knowledge, but still, they're very advanced in, spending hours and hours a day just sitting, reading the Vedanta Sutra, discussing the Vedanta Sutra. They're very advanced in, memorizing shlokas and preaching. So their activities resemble the activities of devotees very nicely. Sometimes they may even wear saffron clothes. They may even wear tilak. They may look exactly like a sadhu, right? Just like the reflection in the mirror, it looks exactly like the original thing. But just as the reflection in the mirror is not physically connected to myself, their faith that they have is not connected to the original faith in Krishna. Therefore, they may advance in their faith, in Mayavadi faith or scientific faith or any other materialistic faith. But because that faith is not having its roots or any connection with Bhakti Shraddha, Krishna Shraddha, faith in Krishna, it has no value. You can advance to the nth degree in scientific faith. You can advance to the nth degree in any other materialistic faith, in Mayavadi faith. But you won't come to the perfection because your faith is not directly connected to the original faith that we should be putting in, which is Krishna consciousness. However, if on the other hand, you look at the Chaya Shraddha, or the faith which is shadowy, we explained that the shadow is very fuzzy and very hazy, but it is connected. So if you look at someone who is new to Krishna consciousness, someone who has just come into Krishna consciousness, a new bhakta, his faith may be not so developed. He may still have some material hankerings, some addictions, but he or she may still be chanting 1 or 2 rounds. They have faith in prasad, they have some faith in the devotees and taking darshan of the deity, even though they may not understand what's actually going on, philosophically what's going on. But if they nurture this shadowy faith, because that faith is connected to Krishna, just as the shadow is connected to the original thing, they can advance in pure devotional service. Their faith can become fully purified, fully pure. So this is the difference. One faith is completely not connected to Krishna consciousness. That's the pratibimba. And then the chaya faith is connected to Krishna consciousness, but it's a bit hazy. But if it's nurtured with time, then what can happen is that it can be fully purified. So that's a little discussion between two different types of faith, chaya and pratibimba, reflective and shadowy. So today is the appearance day of Lord Varaha, right? Vamana, yes, Vamana. It's Vamana Dwadasi today, so the fasting was supposed to be done yesterday, and today is supposed to be feasting. So Vamana, as we know, he's the second son in the appearance. Like for the first time, his parents were Prishni and Sutapa, and Krishna came as Prishni Garbha, and he blessed Dhruva Marj, and he blessed him with the kingdom, and he blessed him by touching him, and then Dhruva Marj was able to recite glorious verses, stuti, to be able to glorify Krishna, Prishni Garbha. Then Krishna came as Vamana, and he was the son of Aditi and Kashyapa. And then we read in Srila Prabhupada's Krishna book that Krishna came a third time as a son, and he came directly as Krishna, and then he was the son of Devaki and Vasudeva. So his devotee that he favored was Bali Maharaj, who is the grandson of Prahlad Maharaj. And Bali Maharaj is glorified in the verse by Rupa Goswami. You know that verse? Shri Vishnu Shravane Parikshita Bhavad Vayasakir Kirtane Prahlada Smarane Tadangri Bhajane Lakshmi Pritu Pujane Akrurastapi Vandane Kapipatir Dasyata Sakyarjana Sarvasvatma Balir Abhut Sarvasvatma Nivedane Balir Abhut Krishnaptire Shampara. So that last line of that verse is dedicated entirely to Bali Maharaj. Sarvasvatma Nivedane. Nivedane means to surrender. Sarvasvatma means, Sarva means all. And Atma means oneself. So that is full surrender. Why did Bali Maharaj put his third step on, why did Lord Vamanadev put his third step on Bali Maharaj's head? Bali Maharaj had so many things. He had an entire kingdom. But Vamanadev, he did cover these things, but ultimately Bali Maharaj surrendered his own Atma. He surrendered his own body, mind, and words. Therefore, Rupa Goswami explains, Sarvas Atma Nivedane. He surrendered not only his material facilities, but he surrendered himself. And ultimately, that is the most valuable thing that we can give to Krishna. Because Krishna doesn't want to interfere with our independence. Therefore, if we voluntarily use our independence to surrender to him, so that is a very nice thing to give to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada explains that previously to Bali Maharaj becoming a great Mahajan in devotional service, he was a faithful atheist. This is in a letter to Satsvarup Goswami Maharaj. So Maharaj had written a letter to Srila Prabhupada asking some clarifications about the Vamana Bali Maharaj pastime. So Srila Prabhupada wrote back, and Srila Prabhupada wrote that initially, before meeting with Vamanadev, Bali Maharaj was actually, because he was a demon, he was a faithful atheist. And Prabhupada explains that even if you look at atheists, they're quite pious, some of them. They like to give charity. They have faith in that. They have faith in material things, materialistic pursuits, like helping others, giving charity. So it was in that vein, it was with that attitude that Bali Maharaj gave in charity to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He didn't really give in charity because he was, he had so much faith and devotion at that point in time to Lord Vamanadev, but because he wanted to do some piety. And Srila Prabhupada explains, because Srila Prabhupada's disciples were painting pictures, as we know, and Srila Prabhupada would often give his guidance and instructions on how the paintings should be painted. So Srila Prabhupada was giving his
instructions on how Bali Maharaj should be painted. And Prabhupada said he should be painted as a very ideal monarch, very nice royal clothing, a nice turban. Bali Maharaj should be painted as being not more than 40 years of age, Srila Prabhupada explains. And he should have a full mustache and no beard, wearing a nice turban. And Srila Prabhupada says that prior to him surrendering to Bali Maharaj, he should be drawn with a three-lined tilak. Right, so the Shaivite or the impersonalistic tilak. And Shukracharya, his Guru Maharaj, should also be drawn as having a three-line tilak. But Srila Prabhupada explains to Satsvarup Goswami Maharaj, he says that, but successive paintings which are made after Bali Maharaj actually becomes a pure devotee, he should be shown thereafter with a Vaishnava tilak after that. So Bali Maharaj, why did he become a pure devotee of Lord Vamanadev? For two main reasons we can present. The first is that Srila Prabhupada explains that Shukracharya, Bali Maharaj's spiritual master, was actually a Jati Gosai. Jati Gosai means he was a hereditary guru. And Srila Prabhupada explains that this hereditary Kula gurus or family gurus is very prevalent in Vedic culture all throughout India, but specifically Prabhupada says especially in Bengal. I remember myself when I was very, very young, maybe it was 5 or 6 years of old. That time I was in India, and my grandmother, she had a family guru. And I mean, I'm not sure, he may have been bona fide or not, I'm not sure. But you could see that every time some ceremony needed to be performed, some samskar needed to be performed, then my grandmother would call this particular guru. And the guru would come dressed in pant and t-shirt. And I don't want to comment about him, but because I don't know his stature. But anyway, he would come and some dakshina would be given, and he would perform the ritual, whatever needed to be done for the family. And like that, the particular guru would be the Jati Gosai or the Kula guru of a number of families in like the local village or the local town. But Shukracharya, he was a Jati Gosai, and Bali Maharaj rejected him. Why? So that's the first reason. He rejected he rejected his guru, he rejected the fact of accepting a guru simply based on hereditary background. Again, to quote the verse by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Kiba Vipra Kibinasi Shuddha Kenanoy Ye Krishna Tatavita Sai Guru Hoy. So one should accept a spiritual master even if the spiritual master is outside of one's hereditary lineage, even if the spiritual master is coming from a lower varna, like a Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya varna. But if such a person, even a Chandala, Srimad Bhagavatam explains, even if a Chandala surrenders to Krishna, the Chandala can become a pure devotee. So one can even surrender to a Chandala, someone outside of the Varnashram system. If this Chandala has taken shelter of a pure Vaishnava, if this Chandala has cultivated some knowledge of Krishna consciousness. So one can reject one's hereditary guru but take shelter of such people who are actually advanced in the science of Krishna consciousness. So that is one reason. Bali Maharaj rejected the fact of accepting someone just on hereditary basis. Secondly, Srila Prabhupada explains again in the same letter, Shukracharya had previously instructed Bali Maharaj, as a spiritual master should, that everything should be surrendered and given to Lord Vishnu. But when it came to the crunch situation, and Lord Vishnu in his avatar of Vamanadev actually wanted to take everything away from Bali Maharaj, at that time, Shukracharya displayed duplicity. Even though it previously instructed Bali Maharaj to give everything to Vishnu in charity, in sacrifice, when it came time where Shukracharya's livelihood was put at stake because he was being maintained by Bali Maharaj and his wealth, when his livelihood came to stake, then Shukracharya acted in a duplicitous way. And he said, don't give anything to Vamanadev, don't give anything to Lord Vishnu. This was the second reason why Bali Maharaj rejected his spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada says that actually rejecting one's spiritual master is a very sinful thing to do. Something not to be done. But in this case, Bali Maharaj became a Mahajan by rejecting his spiritual master, but he did so based on Shastric grounds. It's a very rare, exceptional circumstance in which he did that. And we can see his actions did please Lord Vishnu. But in our case, we're fortunate to have Srila Prabhupada and Srila Prabhupada's representatives. So this doesn't obviously apply to us, but we can still see that a spiritual master should perfectly represent Lord Vishnu. So we'll finish just by talking a little bit about Jiva Goswami, because today is also the appearance day of Srila Jiva Goswami, the youngest Goswami out of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, our acharyas. So it's explained that Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, they had a brother. Does anyone know what his name was? Anupam. Yep, so Anupam. Anupam was a householder, and he had a son, and his son was Jiva Goswami. So Jiva Goswami is the nephew of Rupa and Sanatan Goswami. And it's explained that even when Jiva Goswami was a young child, his devotion towards Krishna was incomparable. It is said that Jiva Goswami, as a young child, had deities of Krishna and Balaram. And just like Prahlad Maharaj, he would offer bhoga to his deities of Krishna Balaram, and he would get the remnants, he would get the Mahaprasad, and he would go to his to all his younger children, his age, and he would distribute this Mahaprasad of Krishna and Balaram. So Srimad Bhagavatam explains that Prahlad Maharaj, as a 5-year-old boy, was not interested in playing with children the same age as him. So in the same way, Jiva Goswami was not interested in playing mindlessly, wasting time mindlessly, aimlessly with children his own age. Instead, he used to favor children of his own age in Krishna consciousness by distributing prasad to them. He was so much in love with his deities of Krishna Balaram that he would always be seen offering arti to them, decorating them very nicely. And many times the Jiva Goswami would actually sleep embracing and hugging his deities of Krishna and Balaram. And everyone was just awestruck to see Jiva Goswami taking darshan of his Krishna Balaram deities. It's explained, I'm not sure if you've seen that video. This is a video of Srila Prabhupada in New York when he was doing arti to deities of Radha Krishna. And you could see in Srila Prabhupada's eyes, his eyes are actually welling up with tears as he's ringing the bell and he's offering incense or flowers to the deities. So in the same way, when Jiva Goswami would take darshan of Krishna and Balaram, his deities, his eyes would be, from torrents of tears would be coming from his eyes. And everyone just seeing that situation would be just mesmerized and amazed at his devotion. And they were very much inspired by that. So when Jiva Goswami grew up a little bit, he had a dream of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya came to him in his dream. And Jiva Goswami got the inspiration and the determination to join Lord Chaitanya in his mission, in his Sankirtan mission. So he actually, at one point in time in his life, when he was a little older, he gave up his family and he ran to Navadvip. And there he, in the house of Srivas Thakur, he met with Lord Nityananda. And it is said that Lord Nityananda favored him very much, and Lord Nityananda actually instructed him to go to Vrindavan and engage in writing many books in Krishna consciousness. And Lord Nityananda, actually, before Jiva Goswami left to go to Vrindavan, Nityananda actually took him on a parikram, on a tour of Navadvip, and therefore we have that famous book, Navadvip Dham Mahatmya, where it's talking about the Adbhut Mandir and all that sort of stuff. So that is Nityananda Prabhu personally taking little Jiva Goswami on a tour around Navadvip. And then Jiva Goswami, as he traveled to Vrindavan, he stopped for a period of time in Benares, in Varanasi, and under the tutelage of Madhusudan Vachaspati, he learned Sanskrit, and he became the greatest Sanskrit scholar, devotional scholar ever in history. So he went to Vrindavan initially, and he took full shelter of Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami. And we know there's a couple of stories of, one story was of a Digvijay Pandit coming to Rupa Goswami and trying to challenge him. And then Rupa Goswami just signs a paper saying, yes, I'm defeated. Because Rupa Goswami didn't want to waste time debating with such person. And later on, Jiva Goswami would go and he would challenge this Digvijay and defeat him, and he would come back and surrender to Rupa Goswami. And the same thing happened, similar thing happened with Vallabha Bhatta, who later becomes Vallabhacharya. So Rupa Goswami at one point in time was busy writing his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and then Vallabha Bhatta comes to Rupa Goswami and gives him some corrections. This verse should be changed in this way. It shouldn't be like that. So some corrections he gives. And then Rupa Goswami, being very humble, he says, yes, okay, I will take your advice, I'll take your corrections. But then Jiva Goswami, who's nearby, he thinks, how dare this person, Vallabha Bhatta, come and correct Rupa Goswami? Doesn't he know the devotional stature of Rupa Goswami? So he goes and he defeats Vallabha Bhatta as well. And so in this way he surrenders to Rupa Goswami as well. So this is some of the glories of Jiva Goswami. I'll finish off by saying that he actually carried a metal stylus. Right? So generally people would write with, I don't know what they would write with, but Jiva Goswami himself at least, he carried a metal stylus. And before he wrote his verses into leaves, into banyan leaves, he would conceive of these verses in perfection in his mind. Right? It's not like us, like if we want to write some report or we want to write some narrative or something like that, we write some things and then we'll rub it out, we'll white it out, and we'll make some corrections. Not like that. Jiva Goswami would construct verses in perfection without any flaw in his mind first. Once he did that in his mind, he would take his metal pen, his stylus, and he would etch these verses, which are already perfect, in the banyan leaves. In this way, Srila Jiva Goswami wrote more than 500,000 Sanskrit verses, more than 500,000 Sanskrit verses, and he wrote more than 25 Vaishnava literatures on the instruction of Rupa and Sanatan and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this again shows the example of a perfect disciple coming in the parampara system. Srila Jiva Goswami ki jai, Sri Vamana Dev ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.